Hello, this is Michael Denon, Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning and Dean of the Division of Undergraduate Education here at UC Irvine. This is Conversations with the Vice Provost. I sit down with people from UCI and the community. We chat about exciting and interesting issues of interest to our students, the UCI community, the state, the nation, even the world. And today, I'm very excited to have our Director of Esports, Mark Deppe, with us. Mark, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, we're going to jump right in to the big question. Esports. Yes. Why at UCI? How did we get started? What's that all about?
Well, UCI has a long history in competitive video games, starting maybe almost a decade ago now with our successful student clubs. And esports started with students competing against each other with these grassroots tournaments. And early in the development of that, UCI students were very successful, won multiple national championships. And so that was the kicking off point for UCI and the leadership position. And then a few years ago, we saw an opportunity for us to elevate that, create some structure around it, and build something special.
Now, you mentioned something, and I remember this because I was sitting on one of those committees that the students had to come and present at. Mm-hmm. And you were there helping them. But it really was the students. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think universities can do and is fairly impressive about UCI is when the students take the lead on that. Can you say a little bit about their role in that process and how I felt they really took the charge and actually made that argument to the faculty and the administration that we then said, okay, yes, this is worth doing.
Yeah, we had some superstar students that really kind of helped get this off the ground. First of all, the gaming community and the leaders of the Association of Gamers, but also student government leaders. So Parshan Khosravi was the president back in the day, and he really latched on to this idea. He saw a potential for this to distinguish UCI, make it a school of first choice for this increasingly important topic. And so, students latched on, and this idea would not have gotten the buy-in from faculty and student or campus leaders without their strong support.
Now, something that comes up as we were rolling it out, bringing it into a university, of course, we use the name esports, but it's still not NCAA yet. And I think that causes people some confusion at times. Do you mind maybe commenting on that a little bit for people, how those two connect?
Yeah, you know, it's I call it an unfortunate term that we use. Right. There is a lot of debate. Is it a sport? Is it not a sport? Are they?
I just want to interrupt you. I play golf, and there's a lot of debate about golf too. Good. Now that I just insulted the entire golfing world, but yeah.
And there's also debate whether these players are athletes or not. Right. And for me, it's not important whether you call them a sport or you call them an athlete. I think it's relevant. I think it is what young people are doing. And there's no denying it's competitive. It takes a lot of skill to do. And so for me, sport, not sport athlete or competitor, I think it really comes down to this is something that matters to the world. And regardless of what term you use, we think it's important.
And I think you said something in there that a lot of people who don't do this may not appreciate. It actually does take not just skill, but a lot of training.
Yeah.
And can you comment a little bit, because our teams do train heavily and how that whole structure works, and there are actually coaches, for lack of a better word, or you could call them mentors, trainers, but we call them coaches, I believe, right?
We do call them coaches. I would say to get good enough to be on one of our teams, you have needed to invest thousands of hours into this. Just like to get good at anything, you have to spend thousands of hours, and not just playing the game to have fun, but playing the game to get better. So. It takes a ton of training. Our teams each have a head coach, assistant coach, analyst, a manager. They each meet with our team psychologist biweekly and also meet with our exercise physiologist weekly. So we are all about creating this holistic, team-supported environment to really push performance. Excellent.
Now, where in general does our team say compete? And if someone wanted to go watch them, what are the opportunities to do that?
Most of the practice and competitions happens in our arena, in the student center. People play there live. We broadcast all our games on Twitch, so twitch.tv/UCI Esports. You can follow us there. We've had 140,000 people watch us in the last year, so a lot of people are checking us out, and so that's where all the competitions happen, is on Twitch.
Now, I do know we have to, I think, address it a little bit. You were involved in it. The nature of the games often raises a little controversy around this. And I think one of the key things is, someone said this, and I forget who, as a university, and this is going to lead into our next question, as a university, our job is to study, embrace, and then move things in directions that we feel are better for society. And we can't do that if we're not involved.
Yeah.
So being involved is clearly a key piece. But how has that been for you, kind of, now, as we get, I mean, that was some of the like anything has growing pains.
Yes.
And in this theme of starting it, you want to comment just a little bit on the growing pains? Because I know we'll get comments below on the video on that.
Yeah, and we'll read them.
Yeah.
I will say, yeah, there are definitely critiques about esports and video games and their influence on young people in society. There are people that just think games have no place in the college environment. But as you said, I think it's the university's role to study, research, teach, create, or do public service, and we have to do that on relevant topics. And esports is relevant. And as we've discussed, UCI is in a leadership role, so we have a chance to set the agenda, set the research agenda, uncover what's actually happening, dispel some of maybe any false negative myths about games, and challenge and try to push the needle and improve and elevate games to where we want them to be.
Now, it's really early in the process, but before we go to the topic of research, it may be too early, so I understand if not yet. Have you seen places where UCI's involvement has actually nudged the gaming world in certain directions, or is that still a little early?
You know, I think on the collegiate level, everyone's looking at us. Every university that starts a program visits UCI, they have a call with me, they look at our business plan. We're very open source with a lot of our documentation. We give a lot of tours and calls. So we have had a huge influence on college esports. Broader than that, I think we haven't talked about diversity yet, but that's a huge topic and challenge in esports. It's a very male-dominated space. People do look at UCI as a group that's interested in solving it, and so when conversations happen, we host those conversations, we are involved in those conversations, and people are looking at us to kind of signal how to welcome in populations that are not represented right now.
Perfect. And that's a great lead-in, because to make change, I mean, I'm a researcher, I'm a physicist. Research is the first step, and we have tied from the beginning this endeavor closely to our research efforts. To the average person, what does that mean that we're doing, quote, research with this?
Well, I don't do research.
No, I know you don't, but I know you're aware of the people who are doing it.
We do, yeah. So what we do on the academics and research side, and it's one of our pillars, it's our second pillar. We're very proud of it. So we support faculty research. So if you're a faculty member anywhere in the world, a graduate student, an undergraduate student, you say, I want to study, do something with Mark's esports players, the community, we try to support that. We try to say yes. So we work with graduate students and faculty to do research in the arena with either the large gaming population we connect with, or specifically our competitive players and the elite gamers. So we are helping supply the topic of study, I guess, or the subject matter for people to study. So
as our students probably wouldn't like to be called this, but we're basically a lab.
We are a lab, and I think I'm okay calling it that.
Yeah, okay. I know we are. I just hope the students are good. Now, you mentioned this in our little teaser. We have some of the top faculty in this area too, which is another big draw for UCI. I know it's not your area of specialties, but can you comment a little bit on some of the projects we're doing in research in this area? Or are you a little concerned that they'll get upset at how you present their research?
I don't think they will.
Okay, good.
I mean, I'll call it, there's some buckets.
Right, yeah.
So we do some stuff on the brain, right? There are people studying memory and 3D immersive games, as we have studied and proven in the arena and other places, improve memory. And so people are studying the human effect of games and how they affect the brain. There are also people studying communication and language. And so our teams are competing, they're communicating with each other, they're sharing pieces of data that are going to be relevant to them in the seconds or minutes into the future. And so people are trying to study how information is stored among a team and processed and communicated, and the best teams are really good at that. And then I think finally, what we're trying to start to do is look at performance. And that could be stress, how stress impacts performance, how fitness, are micro workouts during practice and competitions beneficial, and just understanding how we push high-level performance up a little bit and try to improve peak performance.
So that's actually a very interesting question. One thing I've noticed, this is not just in esports, this is also in sports in general. Our ability on the research side to deal with big data, to have better measurement tools, to just have the data to begin with, has really, I think, transformed how people think about training for elite activities, whether it's sports. even I think in art and other areas, the feedback we can give to people is much greater. And I believe I was talking to Constance, one of our faculty, about this, and I think she's doing a little with this, where helping the gamers understand how to deal with data to then evaluate their play and improve instead of just it going by intuition. Is that something we've actually rolled out, or we're just thinking of, or how is that sort of interacting with our competitive teams? I know you mentioned that a little bit, that we're starting that. Is that the point where we're at with that?
I would say, I don't know if research is there yet, but I will say that the community is there for sure.
Okay.
We definitely look at data, probably more than any other sport out there.
Right.
We just have rich, accurate data that's unbiased.
Right, yeah.
And so we do look at win rates. We look at our opponents. We can scout them to levels no one else can scout them to. There are analytics tools that comb through all the data and provide very accurate, useful stuff for us. We subscribe to some websites that provide really useful tools for us. So yes, absolutely esports, the professional scene, we're probably leaders, one of the leaders in collegiate that use the most data, and you have to have people that look at it and process it, and we have one of the biggest staffs out there. So it's definitely happening. Research, I think, is just starting to get there.
Okay.
I will say, I've heard Constance say many times that esports research is a blue ocean, like it's just starting.
Right.
You could go any direction and it's new.
Yeah.
So I think we're laying the baseline of like describing esports right now, and then once we've described it, we can start thinking what are the important questions to ask.
So in that space, this is actually a little, I didn't prep you for this one, but it struck me as we're talking about research and the community. For those who don't know, Blizzard is sort of in our backyard. Where are we? Do we get involved at all in thinking about what would be that sort of direction to design games in these two spaces you mentioned, right? We learn gaming can help with memory. There's actually way more positives to doing video games than I think the average person recognizes, and we're learning that from research. It's not just anecdotal. So in that space, whether it's our students, whether it's over our grad students or faculty, or collaborations, I feel like having this esports arena helps us be in that conversation of what are the next games to build that would be really good for competition, but also really good for these other side benefits. Do you get involved in that at all, or do you see it happening? How does that working right now?
I'll say we have our finger on the pulse of what's popular, what's trending.
Right.
I think it's hard to predict what games are going to be the next Fortnite. Fortnite's like the biggest game in the world right now, and if you have kids, you understand what Fortnite is, right? So I will say I don't want to be in the business of guessing. There are really great games that don't catch on. Some great games come out and people move on after they played it for a little bit. I guess we're not. That's not something we're thinking about. Is predicting what's next. And I think also designing games is all really tricky. So designing games for education might be good if people choose to play them, but the games that are most relevant are the ones the community chooses to play, and
so you got to kind of hit that sweet spot where people will play it and they don't realize they're being educated.
Yes, so
that's what I try and do in my class.
Yes, you can't force people to love an educational game. I think people have seen over and over and over that doesn't work.
Yeah. So since you said we don't like to predict the future, we'll go to our last question and ask you to predict the future. So where do you see the next couple things going? I'm going to ask it a slightly different way than just predicting the future. This is something that just hit me now. One of the things that always has fascinated me about the sports I watch and play, whether it's baseball, soccer, football, tennis, even basketball. And basketball is an interesting case, I think, because it's at the edge of this, right? There's a set of rules, a playing field, a size. This was all somewhat arbitrarily designed, and yet it still works, right? It remains competitive despite advances and so on. Like I said, basketball may be the one exception where the hoops are just getting too low. But is there, in the time you've been watching this and seeing our students compete and stuff, is it the gaming company? Are they constantly having to tweak the games to keep them competitive as these people get better? Or is it like sports where since you're playing against another team, just that the humans are ratcheting up sort of equally well so they're still competitive against each other? Does that question even make sense?
No, it does. No, it's a great question. So we offer scholarships and play two games competitively. League of Legends, which is a Blizzard game. No, Riot game. And then Overwatch, which is a Blizzard game. Both of those games get regularly patched, and that means they tweak the game. They tweak the rules, they tweak all the people in the game, they might change the playing field. For League of Legends, it happens every 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I will say being good at the game means being good at adapting. So you might be really good at a hero or two or a champion or two, but they might get nerfed, which means they power them down, or they might change the game such that they're no longer effective. So players at our level need to be able to play all the heroes at their position and understand how the changes that happen bi-weekly affect the competitive modes.
Okay.
So yes, that is an essential part of esports, and I think they do it to both keep it interesting, keep it competitive. They add new heroes, new abilities to keep it fresh. They'll change the playing field, like I said. So it is both like the teams playing, and it gets better because the teams are competing and they're different teams, but also the game changes.
Now, when a game changes, how much information do I as a player know about the changes, and how much do I have to discover by playing the game?
You know all of them.
Oh, you do?
Patch notes come out, you read 10 pages of text, your coaches and analysts will say, given this new patch, here's what I think is good, here's what is no longer good, we can't play this, here's a new strategy to look at. So it's a team discussion, and then we practice everything in practice and try to find out what's still powerful.
Okay, so that sounds nothing like the video games I played as a kid.
No, they are very different, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we actually have to have, our gamers actually have to be able to read and process more information than a typical student might have to do.
Yes, the game changes, and if you don't read those patch notes, then you're going to be lost. Yeah.
So with that was the safe question.
Yeah.
So now let's start talking, predicting the future a little. What sort of things do you see on the horizon? I understand we've been involved in helping build a high school league of some sort.
Yeah.
Do you see, is there a current regulating body like the NCAA? Do we see one coming along? What are some of the things you expect might happen in the next couple of years?
So one big topic is it will continue to grow and get more organized.
Right.
So when we started our program, there were 4 schools doing it the year before. We started 2 years ago. There are over 100 now. Ohio State announced a program, USC announced a program, so it's the big schools are catching on. It will go down in age group 2. We have a high school league that's North America wide. Middle schools are starting to think about it. Elementary schools will think about it. It will be different games that are more age appropriate, but this will trickle down into the younger ages. And I think it will be used more for educational purposes than just purely competition. In terms of regulation, I think it will be different than traditional sports in that each game company owns their intellectual property. And so each company will choose the rules and govern the games themselves, and the community will choose to play the games that are governed the best, that have the best environment, and if a game is poorly organized or managed, then we'll move on.
Okay. Now, in that space, something we had talked about just before we went live with the interview, my first experience with virtual reality was thanks to you at graduation, and I got to finally use a lightsaber. Yeah. That was very exciting. And you had mentioned there's this new kind of, hybrid where you're in the real world and virtual reality. My understanding is that hasn't made the competitive sports yet, presumably, right? Yeah. Do you see that coming in anytime soon to the competitive games, or is that still a little too early? Or
there's been a lot of buzz over the last couple of years about virtual reality for sure, augmented reality, which is similar, and mixed reality, which I think is the newest, coolest thing. I think the ceiling is the highest for augmented and mixed reality, where you're looking around the world and you see images superimposed over the real world. Right. I think the super immersive virtual reality is just tough. We have not seen much esports, nothing really significant pop out of that. There's a little bit happening, but I think the technology isn't quite there yet. For esports to be esports, to me, it means it has to be widely relevant. Right. Lots of people have to access to it, and the technology is really expensive and clunky and ever-changing. And so the number of people that have access to it and play it isn't big enough for me yet to think of it as like a massive esport.
Right. And that's something I want to follow up on. You mentioned in the teaser and going forward. Clearly, I think everybody is working on the gender issue from a diversity point of view. But one thing that is potentially, revolutionizing about this is the diversity of people who can participate at the same time. Maybe want to comment a little bit on that, and then I may have a follow-up question there.
Yeah, technology right now can be expensive. Like the best computers are cost prohibitive for many people. But one cool thing is that as this goes into schools often have enough technology to do these things. League of Legends, we say, can run on a toaster. You don't need a nice computer to run League, which is why it's so massively popular. Right. So as technology gets cheaper, as schools adopt it, I think it will have much more impact on society. Many more people have access to it through schools, through libraries, through other places, community-based organizations. And so I think there's really great opportunities for this. We just need to be very conscious that we're not excluding people and making the rules or making the equipment so expensive that some people can't play.
Yeah, so really this is driven by the cost of equipment more than the nature of you as an individual, right? Most people can train to get good at esports, and at least at a level where they have fun and they play this. Whereas I think some sports are often beyond various people's ability to train for.
Yeah, you know what a volleyball player or a basketball player looks like when you're walking around campus.
Yeah.
You don't know what an esports player looks like, right? So I do think it opens it up to a lot more people. It is skill-based. The utopia in the future has men and women and people of all shapes and sizes and colors playing together. We have a long way to go to get there, but as you said, UCI is very interested in that. We have a task force on this. Faculty are holding us accountable to it, so we are trying to push the needle. A lot of great people are trying to push the needle, and so it's something we're really focused on.
Well, a very exciting time. I'm looking forward to it. I will say, I feel like I missed the boat because I still can't even play Zelda without running off a cliff into fire and burning myself to death, and it drives my daughter nuts. But I can beat her in any game that involves just a joystick and a button.
Okay.
Because that's what I learned on. So thank you for coming, Mark. This has been fun to talk about. I look forward to the next level of esports.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. And hopefully you enjoyed this one and catch up on all our other conversations with the Vice Provost. Thanks for watching. This is the time where you get to be part of the conversation. Comment below. You know the drill. You know how to do that. Subscribe, follow us, look for us on all our social media, and stay part of the conversations. Thank you.